Morning, Rich here. I was driving the Vario the other day and noticed one of the rear wheels was getting a bit hot, and that's a sign of brakes binding. Anyway, it seems to have escalated somewhat, and I'm going to replace the caliper on the rear near side. So hope you might want to join me with that. I've started by topping up with brake fluid and sealing the top of the reservoir to create a bit of a vacuum inside. So let's go look at the caliper and see what the problem is. Okay, so here's the brake caliper on the rear of my Vario. This is a new one, of course, but I'll just explain how it works for those of you that are not sure. So when you see this will be the top of the unit and this will be the bottom. So your fluid comes in here and pressurizes two pistons, one at the bottom and one at the top, and this is the bleed nipple. So when you see it, of course, your disc will be here. There's the retaining clip for the brake pads. Here are the brake pads. And what happened on my vehicle, because the pistons are only on one side of the caliper, you need to create this, or the manufacturers create this sliding device inside here. And what these sliders do is make sure that the pads wear evenly. If this slider wasn't here, the pad that was touching the pistons, of course, would wear much quicker. So put this slider in and it kind of squeezes the disc that sits in the center here between the outer pad and the inner pad. Now the problem is this slider, if you don't use your vehicle much, or if you don't maintain it well, or if these units are old, you get a bit of corrosion inside here. The grease dries up and these sliders tend to seize, and what happens is the carriage here, this slider, seizes up, and when it seizes up due to corrosion, you end up with the inner brake pad wearing much more quickly than the outer brake pad. And of course, when you put the handbrake on, and that's what this mechanism is here that acts on this cylinder, this piston, when you engage and disengage the handbrake, that can kind of seize this slider in a set position, and then you get the brake pads binding. And that's what happened with mine. My sliders had kind of seized up somewhat, and yes, I could free them off quite easily, but it's going to happen again. So what I decided to do was replace it. I got this reconditioned unit. It's as good as new, I believe. I've used these units on the front of this Vario. It's the first time I've looked at the back, and yeah, they both need doing, and I'm doing them today. So it's it's from Birmingham Brakes. Seem to be a great company to deal with here in the UK. It's a reconditioned unit, or a exchange unit, so I do the job, swap the new for old, and then send them the old one back. So quite straightforward. So join me as I replace this. Okay, so the vehicle is off the ground and chocked. The brake fluid reservoir is topped up and sealed, because I'm going to be needing to disconnect the brake hose. What I've also done is disconnect the handbrake. That's what this mechanism here is at the back. So I've disconnected that, taken the pin out. My vehicle hasn't been used for 24 hours, so the air pressure's dropped and the brake has engaged. So yeah, pulling that pin out was a bit tricky, but you know, just get that done. And so this here is disconnected. Next stage is to remove the caliper from the axle, and that is done by removing 4 18mm bolts, and those are located 2 at the top on the back of the caliper up here. If I move that, so yeah, 2 up here and then 2 immediately beneath it down at the bottom of the caliper, so about at the bottom half of the axle, so down here at the back. So disconnect them and the caliper will loosen. It's only going to be then held on by this flexible brake hose. So you'll see what I've done here. I've taken off this brake sensor retention bracket, those 2 little bolts at the back here. I've taken those 10mm off. I've taken the shoes out, I've taken the pads out and the retaining clip that sits here, so the brake pads have gone. Yeah, it's a heavy unit this, so take care. It's certainly more than 20 kilos, so probably worth getting a trolley jack, and as soon as you unfasten it, of course, it's going to be free hanging, and you do not want it to hang off this brake flexible, so have some kind of block in place to drop it on. You're going to have to remove this flexible brake hose. I'm going to replace the brake pipe, and I'll show you that next time. Now let's loosen those 4 18mm bolts off and yeah, get it ready to drop onto the floor. So I'm just in the process of editing this video, and as you might have noticed, the focus in the introduction wasn't great. I'm using a different camera, this one, and yeah, it's not perfect. I think it's probably worth watching if you are interested and you've got this job to do. You'll certainly pick up some information, and it's, you know, it's valuable if you are faced with doing this job. However, I found it a bit frustrating because the focus isn't quite right. So apologies for that. Watch it if you want. It's not all bad and it's not all perfect, but anyway, I've done it and I'm going to upload it, and I hope you find it interesting. Bear with me and I won't use that camera again. Thanks a lot. So I mentioned just a moment ago that you don't want the brake caliper hanging from this flexible hose here. So I've done 2 things. I've clamped the hose using a pair of vice grips up at the top here, so that flexible hose is now airtight. You can just see that up here. So the reason for doing that is to stop fluid draining from the reservoir in under the bonnet and out through this brake pipe down here. So I've disconnected the caliper from the vehicle at this point down here. The reason fluid is not pouring out of there, 2 reasons. One, I've clamped it here, and secondly, I've created that vacuum underneath the bonnet by sealing the top of the brake fluid reservoir. That's going to give me an opportunity to take off this brake sensor and give me a chance to replace the flexible with this new Mercedes unit and replace the hardline with this copper pipe. This is between 21 and 22 centimeters long. So when we've finished the job, you'll see if I measured that right. I did allow a little bit extra, so let's see. So now I've freed the caliper from the vehicle. I'm going to take those 18mm bolts off and I'm going to drop the unit off. It's not held on the vehicle except by those bolts. So let's do that and we'll have a bit more, we'll be able to see a bit more and assess the disc better. Just be careful to protect these threads. Nice condition, all four of them are identical, so there's no real need to sort them out. I disconnect the bottom ones first because then it's kind of hanging from the top, and then I'll disconnect the top one. And of course the risk with the job is that the very final bolt, you unfasten it and the whole thing falls on your hand, so just take care with that. Right, let's get this off. Oh, that's got to wait till it that. Okay. So yeah, you can see the sliders in this one are quite worn. Is it moving freely, that carriage? Not really. It's moving, but you can see the rubbers on this are not great. Let me move the camera and we'll have a better look at that. Okay, so yeah, you can see this is the old caliper. It's clearly the original one, and as you know from this channel, I do tend to like to keep on top of my jobs on the Vario and the Land Rover, and you can see I've been at these sliders before, but that rubber seal is supposed to go all the way. It's supposed to protect that piston. I've got brake grease on there. You can see the brake grease is not white, it's black. So yeah, it's no surprise that this is beginning to seize up, and I'm glad I've caught it before it's damaged, well, before it's worn more brake pads out and created that heat problem. Also interesting to note that the seal on this upper piston, which is the one that moves probably most often, has the highest range of movement, is starting to perforate here. So yeah, that's an issue. I'm really pleased I'm replacing these, and yeah, that was an easy job, by the way. Taking those 4 bolts out is fairly straightforward. It's a good job whether you're doing your doing jobs or not. When you're underneath the vehicle, inspect those kind of bolts. So I've had these out before. I've lubricated them, I've marked them with paint so I know that they're lined up again, and I can tell just by glancing under the vehicle before I go on a long trip. I can just check everything's in order, the bolts are all tightened, everything's in good shape. So yeah, I'm going to box this up and send it back to Birmingham Brake Calipers, and let's fit the new one. I'm going to clean the disc up first. Okay, it's a good time to actually just show you this handbrake mechanism. So what I was just doing was comparing the two units and making sure that the one I've got is the right one. Just checking those measurements. So yeah, I mentioned before that this is the handbrake mechanism on the lower cylinder, and that is self-adjusting. So as the pads reduce in wear, this piston moves steadily out, and it's on some kind of ratchet system. So when you are refitting these, let's say you get to this stage and you decide, okay, I'm gonna keep the same caliper, clean this up, replace the seals, refit it. Before you do refit it, you need to wind back this adjuster, and you can see perhaps inside there there's this 8mm hexagon. So you've got to kind of push that and rotate it clockwise to thread it into the housing and get it back to this kind of position before you lift it onto the vehicle and get back into get back rolling. There is another video on my channel. In fact, there's a couple of brake videos. One is this job on the front, so that might be worth looking at if you're interested. And there's another one that just kind of reviews the brakes. It's probably more than a year old now, so we've all learned a bit more since then. But you know, if time's on your side and you're interested, have a look at those two videos. And if you've got questions, I'm not a Mercedes technician by any means, but I've been doing brakes for longer than I care to remember, so I've got a few nuggets that might be worth sharing, and I'd love to learn from you if you've got any to share with me. So let's get this thing fitted. Okay, so I'm just finger tightening up these 4 bolts. The caliper's in place. Fits a treat. I've just put a tiny little dab of Loctite on those bolts, and I'll put a little dot of paint on just so I can really quickly and easily monitor whether they're coming loose ever. Just when I'm crawling underneath, I don't need to touch anything or check anything. If the paint dots line up, I know it's still tight. I just wanted to show you this bit because this really illustrates the sliding portion of the caliper. So just literally with a couple of fingers I can slide that, and it's so much better than the new one. So if you are pondering doing this job, yeah, just do it, because it's that is so nice. What I'm going to do now is this brake sensor bracket, that hole there supports the flexible brake hose. The brake sensors go into these 2 ports here, and yeah, it goes on the caliper like that. So I'll take these 2 10mm out. I will fasten that in place, and yeah, I think it's then it's time really to start fitting the brake fluid lines. And yeah, I'm going to tighten this up first though. Let's get that done. Might have time for a nice cup of Yorkshire tea actually. I'm due a pint of tea, so I think I'll do that. That's half a litre in Mercedes terms. Okay, 15 minutes later, I have replaced the flexible hose here, fastening it to the vehicle and the vehicle brake pipe just the other side of that bracket that fastens onto the vehicle. If I zoom out a bit here, a bit awkward. Yeah, yeah, that's the other end of that flexible brake pipe, which I got from Northside Trucks in Leeds. It had to come from Slovenia, so it took a couple of days, but got it. Comes through this bracket on the back of the caliper, fastened onto this new copper brake pipe that I've made. It is the right length, that, and it is 22 centimeters, so that's spot on for when you have yours done. When you're fitting these, this little bracket here cost me 80p, and so 0.8 of £1 sterling. Worth getting, one for each end of this. And what that does is it holds the brake pipe and the flexible hose and the bracket at the same time, so it's useful. Whenever I'm fitting these kind of things, brake pipes, always clean everything up first and get the right size spanner. So that's a perfect fit on the back of that flexible hose. There's 2 flats on it that you mate up with a perfect spanner. Always use, or I always use, a brake spanner, so it's got a slot in the end, fits over the pipe, and you don't want to be dogging that up too much. It's copper, so it's quite a soft metal. I tend not to wear gloves when I'm working on brakes, certainly with pipes, because threading that in with your fingers you can feel whether it's getting into the joint perfectly, so I tend not to wear gloves. Also, if you do wear gloves, you're going to end up throwing them away. I've changed my boiler suit, I got my cuffs wet with fluid, and yeah, brake fluid's nasty. It gets damages paintwork, so imagine what it does to your skin, and you, heaven knows if it got into your eyes. So yeah, fluid, of course, you can't get a perfect airtight seal under the bonnet, so fluid does tend to team out the bottom of here with thanks to gravity. So I fitted that first, this second, that third, and the fluid was kind of following me through the pipe. So I expect the bleeding process of getting the air out of this is going to be straightforward. So let's do that next and get any remaining air out of this system. Before I do that, because one of the important parts of bleeding the brakes is to push the pedal down, I'm going to put my brake shoes in here. So yeah, I'll do that and then we'll bleed the brakes. Okay, so I'm about to start bleeding the brakes. First thing is to release the partial vacuum that you've created in the brake fluid reservoir. So I've taken off that airtight cover, fastened on with a rubber band. Those of you that watched the video on front replacement of the front brake caliper, which is similar, I did have a much better technique, but I just couldn't quite find that. So this is airtight and that's the purpose of it. When it comes to don't over tighten that, by the way, just leave that slack so that fluid can nice and easily drop down in this reservoir as you pump it through the brakes. So in terms of bleeding, it's fairly straightforward, and there's lots of videos on YouTube on the correct way to bleed brakes. It's a two-man job for sure, so I'm just going to wait about 10 minutes till one of my neighbours comes back and he can give me a hand. It's a question of applying some pressure to the brake pedal inside the vehicle, opening the bleed nipple on the caliper. The person inside the vehicle's foot will drop as the fluid from here goes through the master cylinder and bleeds out through that brake pipe. And as it bleeds out, it'll take small bubbles of air, etc. So do that each time. Do that, you know, you're going to probably use about a third of this fluid. It's a good opportunity to flush through old brake fluid and replace it with new, which is always a good thing. So yeah, all the time you press down on the brake pedal, have the bleed nipple open with fluid teeming out through a pipe down into a container. And then just before the brake pedal hits the bottom of the stroke, the person inside the vehicle is going to say, I'm at the bottom, nip up the bleed nipple, release the brake pedal, etc. And that process goes on and on. But as I say, lots of videos on YouTube about that. Just the same with my Vario and probably yours. So I'm going to do that and join you in probably 5 or 10 minutes. So you can see how much fluid I've used during that bleeding process, perhaps about 200 ml, maybe a bit less. So top that back up with the correct Mercedes brake fluid up to the line on the inside here. There's a max and a minimum. So that's good. There we go. So that is topped back up to the correct level. The brake pedal is absolutely rock hard. Good opportunity while you're in here just to take off that little rubber cap and check that the float works. Perhaps clean those little connections inside the top of here. That's your low brake fluid warning light sender. So just pull that rubber off and have a little check in there, and well, learn how it works and just clean it up and make sure it's in good shape. So let's go and reassemble the handbrake and we are done. Okay, a few final things. Put the brake pads back in, which of course I did before we bled the brakes. If you don't do that, the piston of course will come all the way out and touch the disc, and that's not going to be great. So make sure you put your pads in. I've put the retaining clip on and the brake sensors and fastened them into the brake sensor bracket there. I've attached the brake sensor wire to the hose, and then final job, I suppose, need to fasten that pin into there so that when we apply the handbrake, the bottom piston is the bottom piston of the caliper is going to engage on the on the bottom there. So yeah, that's not quite right in there. I'll do that properly when I'm not filming. Okay, I suppose the very last two things, of course, is put the wheel on and just make sure from laying underneath with the wheel, the inner wheel in place, that this brake pipe here is well away from the inside of that rim. It looks flush, and I'm 99% sure, but the last thing I want is to go for a test drive and find that that brake pipe is rubbing on the rim. So very important, just like these brake sensor wires, nice and flush around here. So okay, I think that is the job done. Thanks for joining me on that. I hope you've picked up a couple of nuggets. I've enjoyed doing it, and I'm going to go for a test drive and just double check. I'm going to check these joints while I'm out and when I get back, just to make sure there's no brake fluid leaks, and of course I'm going to keep an eye on my brake fluid reservoir under the front. Thanks a lot for joining me. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Thanks a lot. Bye.